Welcome back, you relentless survivors, you beautiful architects of your own resurrection, you souls who turned sacrifice into a weapon they never saw coming. They've been watching, haven't they? Watching you burn everything to the ground, watching you lose it all, watching you stand in the ashes with nothing but conviction and a spine made of something they couldn't break. They thought sacrifice meant defeat. They thought losing everything meant you were finished. They thought watching you fall would be the entertainment, the cautionary tale, the proof that their safe little path was the only way. But then something happened that shattered their entire understanding of power. You got back up. Not just up, but higher, stronger, sharper, with eyes that had seen the bottom and decided it was just another floor to build from. They watched you sacrifice relationships that no longer served you, watched you burn bridges to people who only showed up when you were sinking, watched you walk away from money, from comfort, from approval, from everything they worshiped like it meant nothing. And that's what broke their minds. The fact that you could lose everything and still carry yourself like you owned the world. They needed your sacrifice to destroy you, because if it didn't, then everything they believed about survival, about playing it safe, about never risking too much, was a lie. Let me tell you what really happened during those years when you were sacrificing everything while they watched with popcorn and predictions of your downfall. You were conducting an experiment they didn't understand. You were testing a theory they were too afraid to explore. You were answering a question most people never have the guts to ask. The question was this: what happens when you stop protecting the false version of yourself and let everything burn except the truth? What's left when you sacrifice comfort for growth? When you trade belonging for authenticity, when you choose the unknown over the familiar prison? They thought you were losing, but you were shedding, you were molting, you were becoming something they had no reference point for. They saw you sacrifice your reputation and called you reckless. They saw you sacrifice stability and called you irresponsible. They saw you sacrifice relationships and called you cold. But what they couldn't see, what they'll never see, is that every sacrifice was strategic. Every loss was calculated. Every burn was controlled. You weren't destroying your life. You were demolishing the cage. You were burning the costume. You were killing the version of yourself that was built to make them comfortable. And the whole time they were watching and judging and waiting for you to collapse. You were getting stronger in ways they couldn't measure with their broken instruments. Here's the part that haunts them now. The part that keeps them scrolling through your timeline at 3 a.m, trying to find the moment it all changed. You never begged for it back. You never crawled to retrieve what you sacrificed. You never looked at what you lost with regret painting your face. You walked forward like someone who knew the price and paid it gladly, like someone who understood that transformation costs everything and still said yes, like someone who would rather die authentically than live as an imposter. That's what terrified them, not your sacrifice, but your lack of mourning, your absence of regret, your refusal to perform the breakdown they needed to witness. So they kept watching, these observers, these analysts, these people who made a hobby out of predicting your failure. They watched you sacrifice your old self, your old patterns, your old stories, everything you used to hide behind. They watched you become someone unrecognizable, someone uncomfortable, someone who looked at their comfortable little lives and didn't blink. And somewhere in that watching, somewhere in that constant surveillance of your journey, something shifted in them. The mockery turned to confusion. The confusion turned to curiosity. The curiosity turned to something darker, something closer to respect wrapped in fear. They started asking different questions. Not when will they break, but how are they still standing? Not what's wrong with them, but what do they know that we don't? Not why are they sacrificing everything, but what are they becoming that requires this level of transformation? You see, sacrifice only looks like loss to people who've never experienced rebirth, to people who've never burned so completely that only truth remains, to people who worship safety over evolution. But you understood something they'll spend their whole lives running from, that sometimes you have to die while you're still breathing to discover who you really are. They watched you lose friends and expected isolation to break you, but instead you found solitude, power, clarity in the silence where weak voices used to echo. They watched you lose money and expected poverty to humble you, but instead you found freedom, resourcefulness, the realization that you could survive with nothing, and that made you dangerous. They watched you lose status and expected shame to crush you, but instead you found authenticity, the kind of presence that doesn't need titles or validation because it exists independent of their measurement systems. Every sacrifice you made removed another layer of dependency on their approval, on their system, on their definition of success. And that's when they realized something that changed everything. You weren't sacrificing randomly. You weren't burning your life down in some chaotic spiral. You were methodically removing everything that could be used to control you. Every attachment they could threaten, every comfort they could dangle, every relationship they could weaponize. You were becoming untouchable, not through building walls, but through having nothing left to lose. You were becoming free, not through accumulation, but through strategic destruction. And freedom, real freedom, the kind that comes from sacrifice and survives the fire, that's the most dangerous thing in their world. They started watching differently after that, not with superiority, but with something closer to study. The way scientists observe a phenomenon they can't explain with existing theories. How does someone sacrifice everything and gain power? How does loss become leverage? How does subtraction create more presence than addition ever could? They had no answers, because their entire lives were built on the opposite principle, on accumulating, on protecting, on never risking the foundation. But you understood that sometimes the foundation is the prison. Sometimes what you're protecting is what's killing you. Sometimes you have to sacrifice everything to discover you were carrying your power all along. Then came the part they absolutely did not see coming, the part that shattered their understanding of cause and effect, karma, justice, how the world works. You started winning. Not in their ways, not by their metrics, but winning in ways that made their achievements look hollow. You came out on top with scars they couldn't decipher, with strength they couldn't source, with a presence that filled rooms they weren't even in. And the question that haunts them, that keeps them analyzing your every move, is simple and devastating. How does someone who sacrificed relationships have deeper connections than people who played it safe? How does someone who burned their reputation command more respect than people who carefully curated theirs? How does someone who lost everything materially possess more power than people who never risked their comfort? The math doesn't add up in their world. The equation breaks. The formula fails. Because they were taught that sacrifice equals loss, that taking risks equals danger, that burning it all down equals destruction. But you proved something they're still trying to deny. that sometimes destruction is construction, sometimes loss is gain, sometimes the only way to rise is to first reduce everything to ash. They watched you come out on top, and it didn't look like their version of winning. You didn't have their houses, their followers, their perfect photos, their carefully maintained networks. But you had something they'll never touch. You had yourself, undiluted, unfiltered, unbroken by compromise. You had clarity they'll spend thousands on therapy trying to find. You had presence they'll read hundreds of books trying to cultivate. You had freedom they'll never experience because they're too afraid to pay the price. Your victory wasn't in accumulation. It was in elimination. Not in what you gained, but in what you had the courage to lose. And here's what really destroys them when they're alone with their thoughts, when they're scrolling through your life looking for cracks in the foundation. You're happy, genuinely happy, in a way their comfort never delivered, in a way their safety never produced, in a way their careful calculations never generated. You sacrificed everything they're afraid to lose and found something they've been searching for their entire lives. You found peace in the chaos. You found strength in the vulnerability. You found victory in the surrender to transformation. That's the paradox that breaks their minds. You died to win, and that death made you more alive than they've ever been. They realize now, though most won't admit it, that they've been playing checkers while you've been playing chess on a board they can't even see. Every sacrifice was a move. Every loss was positioning. Every burn was strategic, territory denial. You weren't losing, you were cutting weight, removing dead weight, becoming aerodynamic for a flight they're too heavy to take. You came out on top, not despite the sacrifice, but because of it. Not in spite of the losses, but through them. And that's a level of strategic thinking, of long-term vision, of willingness to endure short-term pain for permanent transformation that most people will never possess. Now we descend into the territory they truly fear, the place where your story becomes their nightmare. The moment they realized something that changed how they look at you forever. You weren't just willing to sacrifice. You weren't just capable of losing everything. You would die to win. Literally, metaphorically, spiritually die to achieve what you set out to become. And that revelation, that understanding of your willingness to go all the way, that's when they surrendered. Not publicly, not dramatically, but quietly, internally, in the private moments when they measured themselves against you and found themselves wanting. They saw it in your eyes during the worst moments, during the darkest valleys, during the times when any reasonable person would quit. There was something in your gaze that said, if this kills me, at least I died trying. At least I died real. At least I died becoming, rather than rotting as a comfortable lie. You carried death as a companion, not a fear. You walked with the end as a possibility you'd made peace with. You moved through the world like someone who'd already died once and came back with different priorities. That made you unpredictable, unmanageable, uncontrollable. Because people who don't fear death can't be threatened with loss. Let me tell you what they saw that made them surrender, made them stop fighting, made them step back and let you rise without resistance. They saw you sacrifice your health, working yourself to exhaustion, pushing past limits they respect, breaking your body in service of your vision. They saw you sacrifice sleep, turning nights into workshops, transforming insomnia into productivity, treating rest as negotiable when purpose demanded presence. They saw you sacrifice comfort repeatedly, choosing the hard path when the easy one was right there, selecting pain that produced growth over pleasure that produced stagnation. And in all that sacrifice, they never once saw you hesitate, never saw you question if it was worth it, never saw you perform doubt for their comfort. But here's what really made them surrender, what really made them recognize they were outmatched, outplayed, out-evolved. You enjoyed it, not in a sick way, but in a way that showed you'd found meaning in the struggle, purpose in the pain, identity in the willingness to go further than anyone else would go. You smiled in the fire, you laughed during the worst days, you carried joy through sacrifice like someone who discovered a secret they'll never understand. The secret is this: when you're willing to die for what you're becoming, every day you survive is a victory. Every breath is a bonus. Every moment is borrowed time you get to invest in your vision. They surrendered because they finally understood they were competing against someone who wasn't competing. They were fighting someone who'd already made peace with losing everything. They were trying to break someone who was already broken open and had rebuilt themselves from materials they couldn't source. How do you defeat someone who's willing to die to win? You don't, you can't, you won't. You just step aside and watch them rise. You just surrender the battle you were never equipped to fight. You just acknowledge that some people operate on frequencies you'll never reach because you're too attached to comfort, to safety, to the illusion of control. So here you stand, on top, not because you played their game better, but because you played a completely different game they didn't know existed. You stand victorious, not with their trophies, but with something infinitely more valuable: yourself, intact, evolved, forged in fires they avoided, strengthened by sacrifices they refused, clarified by deaths they feared. And they're watching still, always watching. But now it's different. Now it's study. Now it's recognition. Now it's surrender disguised as distance. They see you now, and they see the cost written on your face, in your eyes, in the way you move through space, like someone who's been to places they'll never visit. They see the scars, and they're trying to count them, trying to calculate what you paid, trying to understand the exchange rate between sacrifice and power. But they can't, because the currency you dealt in doesn't exist in their economy. The prices you paid aren't listed in their marketplace. The transactions you made happened in dimensions their comfortable lives never access. You traded temporary for permanent. You traded comfortable for authentic. You traded their approval for your own respect. And the empire you built, it doesn't look like theirs. It's not made of followers, or finances, or fame in their traditional sense. It's made of something harder to quantify and impossible to take away. It's made of resilience they can't break, clarity they can't cloud, purpose they can't redirect. You built an empire inside yourself, fortified by sacrifice, defended by your willingness to lose everything, sustained by the truth that you'd rather die real than live fake. And that empire, that internal kingdom, it's unconquerable because it exists independent of external validation, independent of their opinions, independent of circumstances they could manipulate. They surrendered because they realized you'd already won a game they didn't know was being played. While they were fighting for position, you were fighting for transformation. While they were protecting their image, you were destroying yours to find what was underneath. While they were accumulating things they could lose, you were becoming someone who couldn't be taken from themselves. The victory wasn't in the outcome. It was in the willingness. It wasn't in the destination. It was in the journey through fire. It wasn't in what you gained, but in what you had the strength to lose. You came out on top because top is relative, and you redefined it. You moved the goalpost to a place they can't see. You changed the measurement to metrics they don't possess. Top isn't a position in their hierarchy. It's a state of being. It's walking through the world, knowing you sacrificed everything false and kept everything true. It's carrying yourself with the quiet confidence of someone who died and came back. It's existing with the freedom of someone who has nothing left to lose because they already lost it all and discovered they were still standing, still breathing, still building. Now we arrive at the final truth, the permanent division, the unbridgeable gap that formed between you and them. They're on one side watching, you're on the other building, and the chasm between is filled with all the things you were willing to sacrifice that they'll protect until death. This isn't temporary. This isn't a phase. This is permanent, evolutionary separation. You became a different species through fire. You mutated through pressure. You evolved through sacrifice. And now you exist in a reality they can observe but never inhabit. They'll try to come back, some of them. The ones who watched you sacrifice everything and now see you on top. They'll approach with apologies shaped like opportunities, with respect disguised as friendship, with admiration wearing the mask of networking.